I think a common misconception when it comes to pageants is that it's these couple of nights of competition, you show up, you compete, and one woman takes home the crown.
Right.
But it's so much more than that. It's a lot of school visits, it's interacting with people, it's inspiring more young girls and young women to get involved in this opportunity because it provides a platform. But it's also truly so empowering to be surrounded by so many strong, powerful, capable, intelligent women who really care about changing the future.
Right.
And I think that's the most important thing about it. And just knowing that there's so much going on behind the scenes, like dozens of rehearsals, hours of community service, and just time being together and becoming part of that sisterhood, I think that's what the Miss America opportunity specifically, can provide to young women.
You're listening to Granted Goodness, the show about optimism, progress, solutions, and problem solving in and around New Hampshire. My name is Andy DeMeo, and today we'll be coming to you from the Hannah Grimes Center in Keene, where I'm talking to Veronica Sokol, who, in addition to being a student, environmentalist, and history buff, is also Miss Liberty 2025, where, in her own words, she is making and living history. We talk about pageantry, celebrating service and achievement, lifting up others, fashion, upcycling, multiculturalism, sustainability, and many other things on this episode of Granted Goodness. I hope you enjoy it. Veronica Sokol.
Yes.
Welcome to Granted Goodness.
Hello.
We're here flying by the seat of my pants, or rather, my pants, because we're not sharing a pair of pants underneath this table, even though you are very open-minded about fashion, and I'm excited to dig into all that. This is cool that we're meeting here, because the last time I was at Hannah Grimes here in beautiful Keene, New Hampshire, I asked them, hey, I'm planning another trip out to Keene. Do you know anybody, doing cool or interesting and positive things in this area? And they were like, you need to meet this girl, Veronica. She's young. She's doing all this interesting stuff. And then, they showed me her socials and I was like, whoa, who is this person? Like, they're interested in sustainability, and they're also interested in like the world of pageantry and kind of retro fashion. Like, I love when people put all these things together. And so I'm excited that you've taken the time to come and sit down with me.
Thank you. I'm excited too. Thank you for having me. This is a new experience, but I'm looking forward to it.
You brought is this a tiara? Is that the right word for that?
It's a crown.
Okay.
Yes, it is my official Miss Liberty crown and the official Miss Liberty sash. So right now I am Miss Liberty in the Miss New Hampshire Scholarship Program.
Wow.
It's a local title in the Miss New Hampshire Scholarship Program, so I'll be competing for Miss New Hampshire in May.
Yeah.
And I competed in August, and I won a total of $20,700 in scholarships towards my college education.
No
which
kidding.
Is crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Thank you.
No one's ever given me money for college. Like, I didn't get any scholarships or anything. But if I had known that pageantry was like an avenue for that, I don't know how much it is for men. And I want to talk about that with you. But good for you. How
Thank
old
you.
are you, by the way?
I'm 19.
Are you kidding me? Oh, my God. So you are a full 10 years younger than me. And this is great because you're definitely the youngest person I've had on Granted Goodness. I had another friend of mine on, a guy named Jason. I think he's like 23. But I've talked to lots of older folks, and, I want it to be about everyone, every generation doing stuff in New Hampshire. So could you kind of I know a little bit about you, I did some research and I've looked at your socials, but for someone who doesn't know like anything about the world of pageants, I guess, is that the right way? Is that the right word for it?
Sure, yeah.
Like this whole thing of like, Miss New Hampshire, Miss America, like what is all that? Like, what is a pageant?
So
how'd you get into it too?
I'm pretty new to it. I actually joined my first pageant last year, and I had watched the Miss America pageants like as a kid, and I knew kind of about what they were. I knew that it was a scholarship program, and I also knew that it had some things to do with community service, and then of course your standard pageant areas of competition. So there's a 10-minute interview off stage with the
Yeah.
judges, and then on stage you have an on-stage question where they can ask you anything. It tends to be about your community service initiative.
Sure.
And then there's also a fitness portion of competition, evening gown, and talent. And I first joined kind of on a whim. I was just looking for Miss New Hampshire locals in my area, and I'm from here in Cheshire County, so there aren't actually any local titles in Cheshire County. So the first competition that I went to was Merrimack, and I won. I wasn't expecting to. I just went to have fun.
You're a natural.
Thanks. But then they called my name, and I was like, oh, wow. And the next few months were a complete whirlwind.
Yeah.
I competed at Miss New Hampshire last year, placed in the top 10, and at this point I was completely in love with it. So I signed up for the Liberty pageant this past August, won again.
Yeah. Wow.
By some grace of good luck, I suppose. And now I'm preparing for Miss New Hampshire this April, May.
Wow. So I'm talking to a verified, you're like a reigning champion. That's so cool.
Thank you.
So again, betraying my ignorance on this topic,
No worries.
I'm like totally curious about it. Like, explain to me, like when I think of pageants and this whole world of pageants, right? And I'm sure there's different, like the pageants at, the local level, there's state level or the national level, right? And I think a lot of people have this, strange and probably inaccurate perception of them a lot of the time of like, why do people do pageants in 2024? And like, what do you get out of doing it? And what's fun about it?
So I can't really speak to other pageants per se because I only have competed in the Miss America opportunity.
Sure.
But I would say one of the greatest things about it is that it is so empowering because it provides opportunity. The Miss America opportunity specifically has a major focus on community service.
Yeah.
So I think a common misconception when it comes to pageants is that it's these couple of nights of competition, you show up, you compete, and one woman takes home the crown.
Right.
But it's so much more than that. Since winning my local title in August, I've put in dozens of hours of community service, traveling
Right.
all across our state. It's a lot of school visits. It's interacting with people. It's inspiring more young girls and young women to get involved in this opportunity because it provides a platform. And I think that's one of the greatest things about it, at least for me personally. I like to say that I would do what I do even if this opportunity didn't exist because I am so passionate about the community service, the sustainability, all of that. But it's also truly so empowering to be surrounded by so many strong, powerful, capable, intelligent women who really care about changing the future. And I think that's the most important thing about it. And just knowing that there's so much going on behind the scenes, like dozens of rehearsals, hours of community service, and just time being together and becoming part of that sisterhood, I think that's what the Miss America opportunity specifically, can provide to young women.
I love all that.
Thank you.
I didn't necessarily know that. Like, you mentioned there's a scholarship opportunity,
Yes.
and I can see how that is like an awesome thing. And I'm not against pageant. Like, this is part of why I wanted to talk to you. I think it's important and fun when people find excuses, to get on stage and to kind of like show off and to celebrate beauty and style. Right. And when people have the opportunity to pair that with, substance, so to speak. Right. Like, it's a really cool thing. One of my favorite quotes, and I can't place who said it, Maya Angelou or something, but, they say make the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. Right. And, you're clearly super involved in, different community things in terms of like sustainability and the volunteer stuff for the pageant world. And doing all that, but also like, having a ton of fun, glamming up and, getting really into the style and the fashion and getting up on stage and meeting all these other women who are doing cool stuff is like, I can see what's really great about that. Right. And it's not like if someone said, oh, it's just a beauty contest, right? I feel like that's not accurate, right?
No, not at all. Especially because of the community service focus and because of the interview, you need to be someone who cares deeply about what it is that you're passionate about. The term servant leader tends to describe title holders in the Miss America opportunity because at the end of the day, you are serving your community. And I think that one of the things that I've learned anyway from competing in the Miss America opportunity is just that you can really be authentic, and style is actually one of the points of the Miss America crown. There are 4 points: style, success, service, and scholarship. And then when you discuss the 5 pillars of the Miss America opportunity, the sisterhood aspect is added as well.
Right.
But that is why I think the vintage thing that I do, this dressing vintage and looking authentically 1950s, that it does still blend into the Miss America opportunity, even though that isn't a pageant style, so to speak, and goes a little bit against the grain, because the style piece is so authentic and it does really contribute to who you are as a person and what image you're putting out to others.
I like it very much too, because there's so much to like about, and you can educate me as well at the same time. Like, I'm someone I unironically love, like the Roaring '20s, and it's a complicated period of history. I wouldn't say I would take everything, that was true in the 1920s about America and be like, that's great. But the parts that people like to celebrate, right? This culture of whoopee,
yes.
like good times are happening for a lot of people, and there was this whole explosion of dance and art and music and swing music and kind of all the offshoots of it. I feel like were a pretty dominant and influential cultural force in America. It was the style of music until like rock and roll really and blues got invented, right? So you can tell me how wrong I am in that, like the fashion and style and music and culture of the 20s and the 50s, like how similar or different are they? But I'm a big fan of retro anything, right? Like part of the beauty of being alive today, in my view, is like, it's great. A lot of these, social boundaries have kind of been knocked down or made, like women can work, people can dress however they like, there's more opportunity for the average person. But it also means like, hey, if you want to make your entire personal aesthetic a callback to, what you find great about 1950s fashion, like you can do that and people will notice and they'll find it fascinating, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually, through my journey in vintage fashion, I've always been a history lover. But I only really got into vintage fashion about 4 years ago. So in that time, just through social media, I've found communities of dozens, if not hundreds of people around the globe who are invested in their own different eras and their own different fashion styles. Yeah. I know women and men who dress in every style from the 1910s to the 1980s. Yeah. And, people are just enjoying that and doing their thing. And one of the phrases that we use a lot in the vintage community is vintage style, not vintage values. And that's not to say that all of the values are bad, because I think that certain senses of community and like lack of technology in some aspects might have been beneficial just purely for a human connection sense. But the other things that came along with those times that have since been removed because they were negative and detrimental to society, those are the things that we choose not to focus on.
Yeah. I love that. Vintage style, not vintage values.
Yes, it's catchy.
Yeah. That's it. You're just succinctly, like I tried to say the same thing, but it took me like 8 minutes, and you're like, actually, there's a phrase for that.
Yeah, I promise I didn't come up with it though. So
well, that's part of the beauty, right? Like I think it's highly original, right? To be inspired by other things and then to turn them into your own version of them, right? Like you saw all these other people and getting fanatically interested and stylized for like the 80s and 70s, all these things, and you're like, I could do that. Me in the 50s, like what, like how does someone from New Hampshire, like a young girl from New Hampshire, like, are there a lot of other people in New Hampshire who are like really into the 50s, or do you feel like, you're a kind of a trailblazer, so to speak?
Well, I don't know if I'd call myself a trailblazer, but I will say I didn't actually know how widespread the vintage community was until I actually got social media for the first time and started connecting with those people. So I was interested in it beforehand and definitely saw it as an opportunity to express myself. I will say in my time dressing vintage, I maybe have met 1 or 2 other people in the state who do it consistently, although there are a number of historical reenactors. Yeah. It's a little bit different. But one of the things that I think is so cool about it, and I guess what really drew me to it in the first place, was that, like I said before, I've always been a lover of history. I actually used to do colonial reenacting at the Historical Society of Cheshire County, which I loved. Yeah. But I was kind of searching for a style that I could call my own, so to speak, and I sort of fell into the vintage style and vintage world just by pure exploration, and it blossomed from there. So I do collect a number of vintage items. It's not just clothes, but even like my skirt today is from the 1950s.
Yeah.
So I do wear true 1950s clothing because I think it's important to keep that history alive, and the pieces were made so well. If I'd like to say if they are still workable and usable after 70 years of being made, then they're probably made really well.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. If only we could say the same of like refrigerators and stuff, right? Like,
I know.
People often talk about this with appliances, but fashion is another. So tell me, does that relate to like, I know that sustainability and environmentalism are important values to you. Like, is wearing, hey, if I find a skirt from the 50s that's like really well made and it still work, like, are these related in your head? Like, is that how you got into the sustainability stuff too? Or like, tell me about that.
100% related in my head, because buying things secondhand is one of the best things that you can do if you're going to be shopping.
Right.
I read a statistic the other day that we have enough clothing already made to clothe the next 6 generations, and clothes are still being made. So it doesn't make much sense to me to buy something new.
Yeah.
Even though the skirt I'm wearing today is from the 1950s, this top is thrifted, the earrings are thrifted, because I think it's important that we reuse goods that are already made if they're still wearable and usable.
Right.
And that's something that I really try to encourage people to do as someone who's a sustainability advocate and an environmental advocate, is to really try and search at thrift stores, at antique stores, especially because a lot of the older pieces are super well made. And even if you might not be as gravitated to a certain style, you can still find pieces that are made well and oftentimes cheaper than what you would buy new.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. You would, maybe I could turn this into like a little series. The sustainable fashion is a wonderful theme, that other people on the show have kind of talked about. I told you about Lionel, right? He may disagree. He's not as hardcore. Like, he just is into the bow ties. His style is, I would say, he's a very modern dresser, and he's a very like stylish guy. But he wears a bow tie every single day, right? And he upcycles them, and like that's an important value for him. And another woman who came on the show, Jen Moore, who goes by Jam, if you've heard of this thing called Project Upcycle in Portsmouth, she organizes that, and it's like, they find emerging fashion designers, from around New England, and then they pair them with models, right? Which are community people. They're not like pro models. They're just like someone who does a lot of great stuff in the Seacoast area or anywhere in New Hampshire, right? And then it's kind of like a little project runway, and they're like, hey, you have one weekend, to like meet your model, design something cool for them. It's all upcycled stuff, and then they put on a fashion show, and it's like, it's just a fun challenge, to get people together. And
that's amazing.
Well, it's just you're talking about the same stuff of like, there's this. Put it this way, Veronica. When I think of some of the big challenges that we face, particularly in the sustainability related issues, one of the things that often comes up for a barrier is like, okay, is the more sustainable version of this, is it better, right? In what ways is it better than the status quo, so to speak, right? And people always go to thinking like, well, oh, it's so convenient, it's so cheap, to like buy fresh clothes that are, made in some garment factory somewhere, right? And it's like, sure, depending on how you define all those things, right? It's like, okay, what really are you trying to get out of like your clothing, your sense of style, fashion, right? Like the kind of lowest common denominator modern take on that, I think, is just so blasé and uninspiring, right? Of like, yeah, go to Walmart, get some cheap pants, wear them until they wear out 6 months from now. It's like, but the stuff that you're talking about, yeah, go to thrift stores, talk to your friends and family, or do community events and like find upcycled clothes and, maybe even learn to mend them and give them new life. And then your sense of style will be totally unique. And there's a story with the clothes, right? Like, it's a different set of values, right? Than just cost and convenience, right? Yes. And oftentimes oftentimes it is cheaper and
It
easier,
is.
right?
I think that's one of the common misconceptions with vintage clothes and secondhand clothes is that they're more expensive than something that you might buy from a fast fashion retailer or like a Walmart, like you said. And that's so untrue. It depends on where you look. You have to find the right places to look. Because if you're looking for something especially designer or something incredibly rare or anything pre-1920s, it's going to be ridiculously expensive if it's authentic because it has stood the test of time or because it was designed to be expensive back in the day, so it still will continue to uphold that price threshold. But if you're looking for everyday wear, it doesn't have to be something so old. I'm very picky about my style, and I do pick specifically 1950s clothes because that's what gravitates to me. But even this cardigan here, I got this for $1 at a rummage sale back when I was in high school. $1. And I have 1950s sweaters, true vintage ones, true vintage clothes that I got for $2 or $3 a piece at local thrift stores.
It may be corny to say, but you look like $1 million.
Thank you.
You're very stylish and just like glamorous right now, and it's like it's so cool. I don't know if like a better living human example of a person I've spoken to. My wife's pretty good at it. Like she finds old stuff and will refurbish it. But like, the fact that you have this knowledge and experience of, pageantry, right? Like you can get on stage and show off this really unique, cultivated sense of style and culture is like, wow. It was $1. I mean, I'm in shock, but that's really cool.
Thank you.
Sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. I think, and that's why I think that misconception needs to be flipped. And even though I do tend to advocate for general sustainability, the sustainable fashion piece is so important, especially because social media has kind of created this idea that we can't repeat outfits or that everything needs to look expensive and polished. And that's why I think thrifting is so important, because you can find pieces that are nice, that even some that were designed if they're 20, 30 years old, maybe even less, that people just don't necessarily want anymore, and you can shift it into anything that fits your personal narrative and your personal style.
Before we were chatting, or we were chatting before we started recording, and you made a joke about like, oh man, I'll be comfortable doing the interview because the interviews for the pageants, like some of the questions they ask you on stage and off stage are like kind of intense. So like, could you share like what kind of questions do they ask?
So they can really ask you anything. I've done a lot of mock interviews in preparation for Miss New Hampshire, and those tend to be a little bit more intense because they always want to prepare you for, whatever might be thrown at you. But one of the things about the Miss New Hampshire interview is that it's like a conversation.
Sure.
Which is really nice, but you don't know what they're going to ask. And that is a little bit thrilling, but also a little bit nerve-wracking as someone who has such a varied opportunity to talk about so many things. But I have been asked about a variety of current events, some divisive, some not, because they do really want to know what your opinions are on certain issues and topics, even if they're controversial. But a lot of them are about what the job of Miss New Hampshire might look like to you. Why do you want to be Miss New Hampshire? Like, why is this something that is important to you? Why are you here? But they do also ask a lot about your community service initiative, because that is so important. So I think the great thing about it is that they can fit a lot of questions about a variety of topics into that 10-minute interview. I think my record for a mock interview is like 21 questions or 22 in those 10 minutes. So, in that span of time, you can really be asked anything about anything.
Wow. I mean, so I apologize if it's cheesy, but I think it's a good question to ask. Like, why do you want to be Miss New Hampshire? Like, what would being Miss New Hampshire mean to you?
Other than the fact that it's been a dream of mine for many years, I would just love the opportunity to represent more diverse young women of New Hampshire. I have a multicultural background. Also, coming from Cheshire County, we have only had one Miss New Hampshire from Cheshire County. Her name was Edna Jones. She was from Roxbury in 1936. And since then, there hasn't been one. So I think this area has just so much untapped potential. And I would really love to represent the women of Cheshire County, the women of a multicultural background, the women of diversity, because I think that's something that this program could really provide opportunity for, and that way I could educate more young women about what this program can do for them.
Oh, that answer makes me so happy. You have no idea. No, I mean, really, like it's almost silly to say, but that is one of my favorite things about New Hampshire, to kind of learn about and emphasize and want to get the chance, to kind of highlight people, right? Of like, people always assume, and it's true, right? Like we're the 89% white state, just by ethnicity alone. But the non-white portion, like they are there. Like there's plenty of, my younger sister's Haitian American, right? And so are my other two adopted siblings-in-law. And it's like both things are true, right? Like, yeah, we're not the most diverse state in the world, but that doesn't mean that, the diversity that is here isn't worth like celebrating, and that people don't have, interesting or like important contribution. Like many of the times the immigrant stories, whether they're white immigrants or non-white immigrants, like they're some of the most interesting, right? Like, and I know all the stats, like immigrants are very good for the economy. Like they contribute a lot. I'm a very like pro-immigration person, not to get like into politics too much, but there are all these great stories, around New Hampshire. I mean, one of my Good News New Hampshire newsletters, like there was this whole story about, Concord, and there's this program. They've done a really great job of like resettling all these, refugees and immigrants from Africa. So like we have this whole community of African farmers in New Hampshire who bring, their experience and, their like cultural, ethnic cuisine and like food background. Like there's this whole beautiful melting pot of cultures and backgrounds and all these different pockets of the state. And like, it's a really cool thing. And it's a thing that a lot of people wouldn't know necessarily if they were just looking at like, the written demographic profile of New Hampshire. So I love the fact that you're proud of, your multicultural background, and that it's tied into this passion for service and leadership and setting an example for women in the state. I think it's great.
I think one of the best things about it is that it's given me a pretty worldly view of events, and also of what it means to be someone from a background of different cultures.
Right.
Because that's an experience that I'm always grateful for. Not everyone has that opportunity to learn about things so immediately.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not to say that everyone doesn't have a cultural background, but growing up in a predominantly white area, having that Asian American, cultural background was something that was different.
Right.
And it is something that I am proud of, and that I really do try to spread the word about to other people, because even if New Hampshire is, I think you said 89%.
It's something like
we'll
that.
Say,
but
we'll say approximately
it's gotten better. It's gotten better the last 10 years. Yeah.
Yes. Even if it is predominantly a white state, there are still, that approximately 10% of
Right.
other people who have these stories to share. And I do think it's important that we represent those people to try and inspire them, because even if I'm able to inspire one child or a whole classroom full to do something that they want to because they see me doing it,
Yeah.
that's just so important.
Yeah. No, it really is, and not to make light of or kind of minimize, the gravity of role models, right? The importance of role models in society. But I'm always thinking about this stuff around the holidays specifically, right? Because, and this is going to sound silly, but there's like a serious thread to it that I'm going to share. I love the crappy Hallmark movies that they make. It's actually funny, we're in Keene, right? A lot of them are set in like these kind of Keene-like towns,
Yes.
right? The quintessential
New England town.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know the story. It's always like, oh, there's someone who's a hustler from the city, and they go back to their hometown in the country, and then like they fall in love and blah, blah, blah. Like it's very formulaic, right? And there's 1,000,001 of these movies. They pump them out every year. Like there's 4 or 5 or 6. And I love them to death because they're so like self-aware and stupid that they're just like brain candy, and they're fun to watch. And you see the tropes, and then they comment on the tropes, and like it's just very relaxing, right? But the other interesting thing, right, is that some of these networks, right, like Hallmark and what's the other one, Lifetime, right? Mm-hmm. They pump out these made-for-TV movies. They have actually put a lot of effort in, like you can tell in just the kind of movies that produced and the people they cast, like they've gotten much more diverse over time, right? It used to be most of these movies were, just starring white people, right? About white families and, predominantly white towns and places. And there's been a real, again, as someone who consumes a lot of these movies, there has been a real shift, right?
Yeah.
And that's, paired with like, the rise of like Tyler Perry kind of like enterprises, where it's like very explicitly like, no, this is black entertainment, like for black people. We're going to proudly wear that on the sleeve, and we're just going to like try and fill out this, cultural media space, so to speak, that I think there's a fair argument to say it's been neglected, right? Like if you look at most of the media, much of the media industry was birthed in the United States and Hollywood. And, for a long time, the opportunities to kind of make media and movies and television and music even was a privilege reserved for white people, right? So it's kind of silly to say, but every season that comes around and I, sit down with my mom and like I go and I watch the latest round of these movies, like it's really cool to see, of like they slowly but surely are starting to fill out, the canon of like, oh, actually there's lots of dumb Christmas movies about black people too, right? And it sounds silly, but I actually think that kind of matters because to your point, in terms of role models, right? Like, there's 1,000,001, like for white people, there's a role model for everything. Like everything under the sun you can imagine, there's an example of someone doing it and having success, right? And I think that, when you talk about opportunities and the way that people see themselves and people who look like them, right, expressed and living lives of success or opportunity, like in society, like it matters, right, to have visible examples, right, of people who look like you, right, or who you can empathize with, right? And yeah, sure, maybe it's not always about, race or, your sex or the color of your skin and all that, but a lot of the time it is, and it matters that there are visible examples of people who look different, right, than the traditional mold, who are out there being visibly happy and achieving and doing things. So that's what I have to say about Hallmark movies and the legacy of multicultural success and why it matters here in New Hampshire and why I think your perspective on it is great.
Thank you. It does matter. If you really look at the evolution of film, considering the fact that the first talkie movie was in 1928, and seeing how far film and the media has come in just not even 100 years of human evolution, it really is a fascinating thing to think about. And you see a lot of people of diversity getting cast in very stereotypical roles. You see a lot of Asian American actors and actresses in the 1920s, 30s, 40s being cast as the villain or as the helpless damsel, and nothing really in between. So to make that leap from those stereotypes really does show, in a way, how hopeful I think society and the media can be and has become, just seeing those leaps. And I like to also look at it not just from a diversity perspective, but from a rural one. And I think that that's another important thing that we see living here around the Keene area. It is relatively rural, even compared to other parts of the state, the seacoast, the central part, that when I go to elementary schools, I can say, I was sitting in your seat not even 10 years ago. And just to show those kids that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what opportunities you may have or not have. At the end of the day, it's about what you're passionate about. It's about putting your mind to something, and it's about the future and opportunity that you create for yourself. And I also know at the same time that I am very privileged to have these opportunities and to have this time to go and extend my time to others. And that's another reason why I think it's so important, because if I have the privilege and I have the opportunity, then I want to do something good with it, and I want to extend it to others, because not everyone is going to end up with the opportunities that I've had or that I've been able to create through time and hard work, but I need to pay it forward.
I was about to say, pay it forward, right?
Absolutely.
I love it. That's
the motto.
Well, it's a good, you're talking about hope and opportunity, and I have to talk about optimism, right? Would you consider yourself an optimist, Veronica?
Absolutely. 100%.
Why? Tell me about that. Like, why are you optimistic?
Without optimism and without hope, I think things may appear much bleaker than they are. And that's not to say that bad things aren't happening, because there's always some conflict or some crisis in various parts of the world, or issues that are happening right here in our country, or even in our state and our communities. But optimism is what drives us forward. I was reading about Jane Goodall recently.
Yeah.
She was interviewed for a magazine, and
Big
she
fan
was
of Jane.
saying, me too. She was saying how hope isn't just this blind thing. Hope is inherently about action. And I'm an optimist, but I'm an optimist who takes action.
Yeah.
Because that is what is important. You can't, optimism without action is all well and good, because it's important to be hopeful and it's important to be optimistic, but you also need to do something about it. And that's why I think optimism is, at the end of the day, what kind of ties together all of what I do, because it is all about positivity and authenticity and paving the way for a brighter and better future.
Yeah. Would you say that, like, a question I'm very interested in is, we talked about this a little bit earlier, like generational attitudes, right? About the world, optimism even, right? Like our place in it. I'm 29, and, I think you're a decade younger than me. I wish that every young person had the same outlook that you do.
Oh, thanks.
I wish, no, really, I wish that every, person my age kind of had the same, I mean, and I don't mean that in like an egotistical, like obviously everyone wishes that everyone shared their worldview, but I really do, like, we could use a little more optimistic pragmatism, right? You are speaking the ethos of this entire show. That's like why I'm doing it.
Yay.
And so your response made me very happy. But, in your conversations, I mean, I'm sure that, your sisterhood and your network and your community through, the pageant world is like similar to you in that, like, yeah, they are action oriented people doing good stuff. But, I'd be curious on your comment for other people your age, right? In kind of the 19, whatever bracket, like, do you find that your attitude of, yeah, like, we can tackle hard problems, we can do it, like, let's make the world better, like, is that unusual? Like, do you feel like a lot of people your age that they feel similar to you? Because the stereotype is that a lot of young people are anxious and depressed today. I should have led with that. That's why I'm asking.
I will preface by saying that I haven't had a very typical, so to speak,
That's fair.
experience. I graduated high school early, and I went to college for a year in person, and I didn't really feel like I was connecting with a lot of people there. It wasn't really providing me the opportunities or the experience that I was looking for.
Yeah.
So I'm still in school now. I'm in my third year. I go completely online at Northeastern University.
Wow.
And full-time. And that's what allows me to do all of this, because I also work. I'm an assistant librarian 4 to 5 days a week.
Oh my God.
So
is there anything you don't do?
play the xylophone. I can't play the xylophone.
I've always wanted to play the xylophone.
Well, I mean to say, in my job, I don't tend to interact with a lot of people in my generation.
Sure.
No longer going to school in person anymore.
Right.
That is also removed. So I don't really interact with a lot of people in my age range, so to speak, although I do interact with and have friends with, or am friends with a lot of people in my generation as a whole.
Right.
And I wouldn't say that my mentality is necessarily an outlier one, but I've always been someone from a young age who has been very driven and dedicated to making positive change.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot within the Miss America opportunity, because it is a shared mindset. But I also understand that a lot of people my age are going to school full-time in person, so they don't have the time to do all of these other things.
Right.
And a lot of young people do tend to be quite driven when it comes to things that they're passionate about. But I also don't expect anyone of any age to have, whatever level of involvement or a certain parameter when it comes to what it is that they're interested in and what they're passionate about, because we all have our own focuses. The only thing that I can do is just try and inspire more people to continue to do positive things that they're passionate about, but it's not really a cookie cutter, approach, so to speak.
It's really great, like, to see and meet someone as young as yourself who is like doing all these awesome things. And,
Thank you.
And I will say, my advice, like, again, you're way more accomplished and put together than I was at your age, but, don't be afraid. Like, burnout is real, right?
I know.
And I know that you know that, and like the conversation on that has like shifted in a very positive way. I think in the last like 10, 20 years, like people talk about mental health now, and, you know, like some of the happiest decisions I've made in my life has been like when I decide to stop doing something, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm at capacity, right? But, you know, if you can manage it and you're, you know, crushing it, like, do it. Because I know what you mean. Like, there's so many things I'm interested in all the time. And when you find a way to like make the symphony of your life that you get to have a little piece or a big piece of all the different things, it's like there's nothing better, you know. And so I know I just met you, but I'm happy for you, and I think it's great.
Thank you.
That you're just like living all these different values and opportunities. So I'm going to guess that these things are related, right? The fact that you're a librarian and that you're really interested in history. Tell me about that. Like, let's dig into your passion for history. How did that all? Why are you passionate about history? Are there particular areas of it that you're passionate about? Do you favorite historical figures? Like, tell me all about that.
Don't get me talking for too long. No, I'm kidding. I love ancient history. Other than the 1950s, it's my favorite time period because a lot of that architecture just seems so illogical. Like the fact that the Great Pyramid of Giza, you know, it's an archaeological marvel.
Aliens did it, obviously.
But it's been measured, the difference in from one end to the other is only 1/4 of an inch. You don't even have that in a modern house, and they didn't have this great machinery and technology that we have now.
Yeah.
And that's something so important to think about. But one of my greatest things about history is that it is our greatest teacher at the end of the day, that there are so many things that we can learn from it because there are a lot of patterns in human history that get repeated. Even fashion is consistently recycled. We see styles coming back now from the 90s, from the 80s, from the 70s, and they're not exact, but all of them were recycled from past eras as well.
Right.
Even the style of the 1950s, which was curated off of Dior's New Look in 1947, was inspired by fashion of the past. So to see that constant recycling and that constant pattern, it's always been so interesting to me. And it's not that I don't love the modern times or look ahead to the future, because I do consider myself to be a progressive person. But it is really just about what we can learn from it. And in terms of favorite historical icons or inspirations, if we're going 1950s, I love Grace Kelly. I love Audrey Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, Ava Gardner, Rita Hayworth, these, you know, bombshells of the silver screen. I will say, though, Gregory Peck is definitely someone.
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Great film, but he was a humanitarian. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. He was very pro women's rights, very progressive, and also just a kind and, you know, authentic, empathetic, upstanding person, which I think is super important, especially because you don't always see those values back in the day when segregation was prominent, when racism was more prevalent, and when women had less rights.
Or let alone from an actor of all people, right?
Yes, exactly. From someone who was so in the public eye and who was, you know, but still advocating for positive change. And I think that there are so many wonderful people in history that we can learn from. Even if their ideas, some of them might have been outdated, I think we need to take everything in terms of that with a grain of salt, just because you have to understand that it was the time. And 100 years from now, people may be looking at what it was that we did and what we spoke of and what we accomplished and saying, yeah, you see, that's not really okay.
How crude.
Because we are constantly evolving even more rapidly now with technology, with social media. It feels like we're on this, you know, info dump constantly. But one of the greatest things about the past is that it teaches us about the future. And also, I just love looking at all of the fashion and seeing how things evolved and how people changed and all of the, you know, social circumstances that shaped humanity.
If you could have dinner with anyone from history, who would it be?
That is like, I think of like 30 people
question. Maybe a dinner party
away.
Then.
Ooh, a dinner party. Well, I would invite all of the aforementioned guests and such. I do think that talking with the founding fathers would be a very fascinating experience. But also, I would want to invite some people from the ancient times. Of course, I would need some sort of translator. But seeing, you know, I would want to know how they built the pyramids. Not only just the Egyptian ones, but also the ones in South America built by those indigenous peoples. And I would also want to discuss that shift that came during colonization and that shift that might have happened with new technologies, with emerging ideas, just to see that progression throughout time.
Right.
I think that would be so fascinating. It wouldn't be a dinner party. It would be like a 3-week-long dinner extravaganza.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love that.
I'd just be going around and like grilling people.
Yeah. Well, you could ask them all the same questions that you get asked for the pageants, right, for Miss New Hampshire. You'd be like, Socrates, why do you want to be Miss New Hampshire? And he'd be like, he'd give a great answer. Just be
he might give a better answer than I would.
Yeah, but no one can understand him, right? Man, that's such a good answer. I don't ask people that question often, but since we're talking about it, that's like, I've never heard anyone be like, forget dinner guest. It's going to be a retreat.
It's going to be such a long retreat.
Right.
I always said that if I could pick any superpower, it would be time travel.
Yeah.
But then, I don't know, I would just keep flitting around. No one might ever see me again. I'd be too interested in exploring everything.
Yeah. Well, it would be so interesting, right? Because like we have these conceptions of how things happened and why, but like you'd want to go back. You'd want to be in the room when they're like drafting the Declaration of Independence or doing all these things, or when Caesar crosses the Rubicon, like all these crazy moments.
Yes.
Well,
because at the end of the day, history is written by the victors.
Yeah, right.
And we don't always gain a nonpartisan, if you will, view of historical events. Because if you were vanquished, you were not going to be the one writing what happened and submitting that into, a library or whatever other means of communication existed at the time.
Yeah.
So it would be so fascinating to just see what actually happened, even if it is through my own personal, possibly skewed lens of an event or a time period.
Right. Well, you'd like to think that even your, like, seeing it for yourself would be different than, as you say, everything that's written about people who don't have the control over the narrative, right? Like it's probably propagandized, right?
A little bit.
It's so interesting to, like, I find that I don't know as much about it as you, but I'm always fascinated by like the methods and, techniques and kind of traditions of scholarly work that historians put in to be like, actually, this is what we all thought about, the Roman Republic in the 19th century. And now we kind of know that, all those sources were kind of heavily, propagandized, like they were changed by, the church or, the people who came after the fall of the emperor, like all these different things, right? It's like by the time we learn about it, it's like, this is such a distinct, warped version from probably what actually happened. And it's like all the detective work they put in to kind of figure out, what is probably... and we won't ever know without a time machine, but it's so fun to learn about it.
Of course. One of my favorite examples is historical portraits of great leaders and of, royalty, because they always made themselves look better than they actually were.
Right.
To their standards.
Yeah.
So now we might look at this person and say, okay, they were, decent looking. This is what they looked like.
Right.
But that was the epitome of attractiveness at the time. And one of those very famous examples is that valiant, so to speak, portrait of Henry VIII, where he's standing there, his leg is up and he's like the picture of virility in all of his frills and, all those fancy garments. And that was like, at the time, just something that was so the epitome of masculinity.
Right.
And it's fascinating to see also how beauty standards change over time and what remains relevant and what doesn't. But one of my favorite things about collecting vintage is like it's my own personal treasure hunt in my own museum.
Yeah.
And thankfully it's not something so old that I can't find it anymore.
Right.
But to be able to collect and to think about the history and who this may have belonged to, you collect things from so many different lives and so many different people.
Yeah.
One of my favorite little odd pieces that I have, if you will, is a little plastic toy bear that was actually made in post-World War II occupied Japan.
No kidding.
And it's like this big. His limbs are a little loose because he is 80 years old practically at this point. But to have that and to know that that was made in such, at the end of the day, a war-torn, strife-filled time, it's just fascinating to see like what stories that these inanimate objects might be able to tell.
Wow. Do you have I wish you'd brought the bear.
I wish I'd brought the bear too, but he's kind of fragile. I don't
You don't like to take him on the road when you don't have to.
After this I can show you a photo. I think I have one on my phone.
Man, well, Veronica, I could talk to you all day long. You are easily one of the most fascinating,
thank you.
cool, guests that I've had on the show. We're going to have you back on when you win Miss New Hampshire, which you will someday. I do not doubt it. But, maybe closing question real quick. What makes you optimistic? Tell me in a sentence or two.
A lot of different things.
Yeah.
I'd say a hope for the future, because as humanity, we have continued to triumph at the end of the day. And also working with children. I work with so many children, and I see that they have these bright futures, and they will accomplish so many things. And that is why I do what I do, to inspire people and to provide more of that optimism, because at the end of the day, that's what keeps us moving forward. And that's what I hope to put out there.
Veronica, this has been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey there, thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator and host of Granite Goodness, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.